everybody, it's Allison. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at a couple cards that I made with my new summer camp collection with Spellbinders. These are cards that I showed in my introduction video, and I said I was going to have a video showing more details, so here we are. I'm going to start with the card on the left with the cute little squirrel, and there's going to be a lot of ink blending. All right, we're going to start with the Lakeside Memories stencil. I showed you the basic stenciling of this in my introductory video. And again, I said I would show you how to kick things up a bit with some additional shading. For this card, I'm using gray to make this first part of the stencil a mountain. In my first video, I used green to make it more like a grassy hill or like a hill of trees. And by the way, I will have all the ink colors at the top of the screen throughout this video. I do use a mix of inks. Now, because I'm using oxides for this, I can add the green trees over the gray mountain. You could do it with dye inks if the gray is really light like this, but remember dye inks are translucent, so I do prefer the pigment properties of the oxides. And so the trees, the green goes over the gray really nice, and you can't even tell that there was gray behind it. All right, now the sky and the lake, I'm using salvage patina, nothing special with these, same way I did it in the first video. And by the way, I'll have a link to that video at the end of this one. I'll also have a link below. Now I'm coming in with peacock feathers on the sides just to make it a little bit darker on the side. I want the highlights in the center. So just a little bit of shading here. But what I'm also going to do is I am grabbing Peacock Feathers regular Distress ink and my Waffle Flower Shader Brush 2+, and I'm just shading underneath these clouds. Now these clouds are kind of loose, that's why you see me holding them with my finger at times, and I'm just adding shading beneath those clouds. Now I'm coming back in with the stencil for the trees, and I'm just flicking green up from the bottom because I want the area where the trees or the grass meets the water to be a little bit darker. So just flicking that color up from the bottom. And now I'm coming back in with that first stencil so that I can add some shading to these mountains. First, I'm just flicking in some darker gray ink from the top just to create a bit more separation from the sky. It just gives a little bit more definition and the look of dimension, kind of. So you can see how that did a little bit. But here's where we really kick it up. I'm going to follow the lines of the stencil, and wherever there's a part that goes down, I just follow that line with my Shader 2+ brush further into the stencil opening. This brush is kind of thin on one side, so I'm using that thin part to create these lines. And when I pull back the stencil, you'll see what a difference this makes. So it just kind of makes it look like they're mountains, and you know, there's not just one mountain, but several. Now we're doing the beach, and we have some Altenew inks. I said I have a mix of inks. Now I'm coming in with vanilla cream just to make it a little bit darker where it meets the water, because that would be where the sand would be wet. And I did do the sun up top already. All right, so we are done with this part of the card. Really pretty. And now we're going to work on the main card panel. I have some masking sheets here from Spellbinders, and I have cut this piece of the masking sheets with one of the dies from the Landscape Edges set. And so the masking sheets have release paper on the back, and I'm going to stick this one at the bottom and So that's going to mask off the bottom and I can ink up my sky. So I'm using Salvage Patina and I'm using this big fluffy brush that I love from Spellbinders. It's just great for doing an overall ink blending. They're just really easy to use, especially with oxides. I love them. Now I'm coming in with Peacock Feathers, and I'm not going for an even blend here. This is meant to be water. It kind of ends up looking like a cloudy sky, but that's okay because most of this is going to be covered. But again, I wasn't going for perfection here. I was kind of thinking this would be like waves. So that's why I was doing that. All right, so now I can peel back the masking paper and you have those nice crisp edges there. So now I have the other side of the piece that I had cut. And now I'm going to cover the sky with that. And now I can color the beach. So I'm using antique linen. And then once I cover this with the antique linen, I'm going to come in with vintage photo and just go along that line where the beach meets the water. Because again, where the beach meets the water, the sand would be wet, so it would be darker. So I'm taking that brush that I had used with the antique linen and kind of trading off and to blend these two colors together. And I did go pretty dark here. So now I'm covering up the rest of the sky and I'm taking my vintage photo distress ink and just spritzing with water and adding some splatter to the beach just to add that texture that you would have with sand. Now, the reason I didn't do that with the stenciled panel, which I normally would, is because you're not really even going to see the beach on that stenciled panel, and you'll see why in a bit. So here is the main panel here. And again, here's the stenciled panel. And my idea was to create kind of a little postcard or little stamp with this scene here. So here I'm just trying to figure out what scene I want. And I decided to get the mountains and the lake, which is kind of my dream scene. A lake surrounded by mountains is just kind of heaven to me. All right, so now I have all my other elements that I'm going to put on the card. The directional signs come from the Trail's End die set. The squirrel is from the Woodland Trio. And then all of these accessories are from the Splash Days set. The cute little life vest, the swimsuit, the canoe. And again, I went over all of this in my first video. And here I am stamping a sentiment along the side of this little postage stamp. Just a fun little detail. All right, now something went amiss with some of the footage for this card. So I'm going to show you how I ink blended the canoe, but on a different canoe. I started the yellow canoe the same way, and that is by ink blending this fawn cardstock from Spellbinders with vintage photo ink. So now I'm coming in kind of from the bottom, and I'm just trying to add shading to the inside of the boat. It might look like a mess here, but once you put the top piece on, you can see why I added all this shading at the bottom. So now it kind of gives it dimension. All right, now I mentioned something went amiss with the footage, so I apologize for the blurriness here. But I wanted to show this bit of shading that I did with the signpost. Once I figured out where the bottom of the post would be, I added some shading to make it look more grounded. It's just an extra detail that makes your scenes look more realistic. I also did the same with the canoe paddle and the canoe. And then, of course, I forgot to do it with the squirrel. But that's okay. So here is the final card, and I think it's really cute, this squirrel with the life vest. I think I mentioned in my first video the life vest is one of my favorite things. I don't know why. But let's move on to this next card. All right, there is a lot of ink blending on this card. It's all about the night sky, and there is a lot of ink blending. So there's lots of going back and forth with colors, and rather than me just ramble on while this is happening, I'm going to do something that I don't do very often, and I'm going to play some music for you. Now, before I do that, I will just mention that when it came time to join the blue color of the sky to the orange, I tried not to overlap that part too much because I didn't want to create a greenish brown color. All right, here we go. Okay, I am back, and I just wanted to make one comment about the ink blending. Normally, if I'm ink blending an entire panel like this, I prefer to use Distress Oxides. They just blend so easily. But regular Distress inks are more vibrant in color, and I really wanted the sky to be vibrant. The blue to orange blend has a bit of separation in it, more than I would like, but once we add in some elements, it works. All right, the panel is done, and now I'm going to add some grass. And I thought it would be fun to use this die from the Torn Paper Edges set to give more of a rustic look, because it's, you know, the forest floor. But you can see the die is shorter than the width of my panel, which by the way is 5 by 7. So I'm just going to do some partial die cutting. Normally when I do partial die cutting, I do it with a die that has a regular, consistent pattern to it. But in this case, it already has the look of torn edges, so it doesn't need to look perfect anyway. So I'm just, you know, adding it to the end here, and then I'll run it through my die cutting machine. And here's what we have. So it is longer than my panel, so I can just cut it down. Now I'm going to stamp and emboss a sentiment directly on the panel. But before I do that, I'm going to stamp on acetate and make sure it's lined up nice and straight where I want it. I don't want to ruin this panel that I just spent all that time inking up. And by the way, because I will be embossing, I did wait for this panel to fully dry. All right, now I'm adding anti-static powder. And I'm going to use Versamark ink to ink this up. And again, Stamping it before on the acetate just gives you peace of mind so that you're not stamping in the wrong place. All right, so now I'm just adding white embossing powder and tapping it off. And I flick from the bottom. All right, so I did heat it off screen. And then after the fact, of course, I decided I wanted to add white splatter to kind of mimic stars in the sky. So I'm just taking a white strip of paper and covering the sentiment. I didn't want any of this white flicks to kind of interfere with the sentiment. By the way, this is Distress Spray Stain Picket Fence color, which is the white color. And I have everything just in this plastic bin that I like to use for splattering things. All right, so that is all done, and now I've added my critters, which are both from the Woodland Trio, along with the campfire and the trees, and now I'm just adding the last finishing touches. Again, if you haven't already watched the introduction to my collection, you can see me assemble the critters and the campfire and all that fun stuff. And again, there'll be a link at the end of this video. So here is the finished card, and I think it's really cute. And you know, that sky is so vibrant, and the orange and yellow below is really supposed to be from that campfire glow. So I also, you'll notice, did not put any clothes on the critters. This was a card that I really wanted to make it without the clothes, because you don't need to have clothes to make these critters adorable. They're just so cute, and that hedgehog is definitely a favorite. All right, that is it for me today. I appreciate you joining me. I know I have not been getting enough videos out. I'm actually getting ready to go to the Create event in Ohio for Simon Says Stamp. So if any of you are going to be there, come find me. I will be at the Spellbinders booth, and I'd love to meet you. So hope to see you there, whoever will be there. And as for everyone else, I will see you next time. I hope to have a video again in a few days, so I will see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.